Oh, hello there, darling. Thank you for joining me, because today we're peeling back the layers on a classic tale of betrayal, a story about how dignity is priceless and a lack of respect is the most expensive mistake you can make. Before we dive into the details, if this message resonates with you, let me know what city you're watching from, because I want to see how far this particular truth travels. Today's subject, sweetheart, the Coastal Paradise Resort incident. They called me many things behind my back, but their favorite label, their cruel little nickname, was the cleaner. Oh, honey, they thought I was just there to wipe the floors and adjust their napkins. They ignored me, gave me the leftover seat, and treated me like staff at the Coastal Paradise Resort. But when she publicly humiliated me at the front desk, she didn't realize she was insulting the woman who signed her mortgage and owned every crystal chandelier in the lobby. The reckoning was swift. Darling, wait until you hear the exact moment her face went white. That, my dear friends, is the promise of poetic justice. To understand the breathtaking beauty of this particular collapse, you must first understand the foundation of lies they built their lives upon. My son, Jay, and my daughter-in-law, Valentina, saw me not as a person, not as a mother, but as an economic utility. They saw me, purely and simply, as a bank account with legs. I was their personal ATM. And for far too many years, I allowed it. I confused the act of infinite, unreciprocated giving with love. I thought that sacrificing until I disappeared completely was my only function in their perfect, expensive lives. I believed that if I kept paying, they would keep pretending to need me, and that fleeting feeling of being needed was enough to sustain my maternal soul. The signs, as always, were tragically obvious to anyone outside the relationship. Every whim, every craving, every necessary expense, and, more frequently, every unnecessary luxury came straight out of my savings. They wanted luxury vacations to exotic locales, justifying it by saying they deserved it after so much stress. Stress they usually caused themselves through fiscal irresponsibility. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. Did they ever invite me on those trips? Of course not, darling. I was only good enough to finance the indulgence, never to share in the joy. They never once called to ask, "How are you, Mom?" unless the call ended with a frantic, desperate request for a cash transfer. They treated me like a poorly managed endowment fund, waiting patiently for the principal to expire so they could access the remainder. And yet, despite the relentless draining of my observable resources, I continued to provide. I had built this life for myself, quietly, and I believed, in my most naive moments, that I was providing them with a secure future. What they didn't know, darling, was the truth of my own quiet success, the extent of my enterprise. After my husband passed away when Jay was just 12, a time of crushing grief that forced immediate and total self-reliance, I built my hotel business from the ground up. I didn't inherit a dime. I started small, just one dilapidated bed and breakfast, working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I personally scrubbed the toilets, handled the reservation system, cooked the breakfasts, and managed every terrifying interaction with the bank. That small, hard-won seed grew and grew, fueled by discipline, relentless organization, and a ferocious commitment to solvency. It blossomed into an empire of 17 properties across 3 states, all strategically acquired, renovated, and managed with the kind of meticulous precision that only a woman fighting for her very survival understands. I kept my business affairs meticulously private, entirely separate from my family life. Why? Because I hoped, right up until the point of no return, that Jay would truly love me for who I was, the woman who read books, who gardened, who valued quiet afternoons not for the vast wealth that could solve his every problem. I thought my secrecy was a shield, preventing my success from being corrupted by their status-seeking avarice. I was too foolish to realize that even the idea of my possible money was enough to trigger their entitlement and greed. They didn't need to know the true multi-million-dollar value of the empire to try and steal it. They just needed me to become legally vulnerable, to be declared incompetent, or simply to die. My empire was a secret, built on sheer will and decades of hard work. It took me 5 years to acquire and flawlessly renovate the crown jewel, the coastal paradise resort. Every detail, from the imported polished Italian marble in the reception area to the glorious 3-tiered crystal chandeliers hanging in the grand lobby, was my personal, painstaking choice. It was the physical manifestation of my refusal to be a victim, and my entitled children had absolutely no idea they were standing on my foundation. When Jay suggested a week in Miami at Coastal Paradise, I felt that familiar, foolish swell of maternal hope. Maybe, just maybe, this proximity, this shared experience, would allow me to finally forge a genuine connection with Valentina, who had always maintained a chilly, 5-year distance. But the long, tedious drive down to the resort was a masterclass in contempt. Jay and Valentina talked exclusively about themselves: spa treatments, the required designer clothes for the area, expensive dinners they planned to charge to my account, and the utter necessity of having high-end tea times. They talked around me, acting as if I were merely the chauffeur or a piece of baggage. Every time I dared to interject a comment, a simple remark about the weather, a question about the grandchildren, Valentina gave me a short, dismissive, utterly condescending answer. Jay, my own flesh and blood, simply ignored me, choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. It was achingly clear they viewed me as an unwanted accessory, an afterthought, an awkward visitor whose only function was financial. As we finally arrived at the grand, spectacular entrance of the Coastal Paradise Resort, a familiar wave of pride washed over me. I owned this perfection. As Jay handed the keys to the valet, a lovely young man I had personally hired and trained, Valentina adjusted her enormous designer sunglasses, the ones I likely paid for, and immediately started issuing commands. "Remember," she commanded Jay, her voice sharp with expectation. "I want the penthouse suite. I don't care what they say about availability. Just make it happen." I refused to look at the parking lot from the second floor. The confident, thoughtful boy I raised was long gone, replaced by a man who couldn't take a single breath without his wife's approval. This, sweetheart, is the enduring tragedy of family betrayal. Watching your child become a silent, spineless accomplice to your very public humiliation. We swept into the lobby, stepping onto the mirror-like marble floors I had selected. Jasmine, the front desk manager, a woman of impeccable composure and deep loyalty, recognized me instantly. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, perhaps mixed with concern, but I gave her a slight, nearly imperceptible shake of my head. My lips barely moved, signaling silence. Not yet. I wasn't ready to reveal the truth. I needed to see precisely how far their entitlement and lack of basic human decency stretched before I pulled the rug out entirely. Jay presented his prepaid reservation. Jasmine, maintaining her perfect professional mask, confirmed they had the beautiful deluxe ocean view suite, but she gently informed them that the penthouse was unfortunately booked for the entirety of their stay. That's when Valentina's painstakingly crafted, flawless veneer cracked, shattering into pieces right there on my perfect marble floor. "That is absolutely, utterly unacceptable," she snapped, raising her voice to a volume calculated to shame Jasmine into compliance. She demanded to know who they were to be denied the penthouse, clearly attempting to use pure, raw arrogance as leverage. Jasmine, well-trained and infinitely calm, remained professional, though I could see the tension tightening her shoulders. I made the mistake, the final, pathetic mistake, of stepping forward, hoping that my calm presence could magically de-escalate the volatile situation. "We should just accept the deluxe suite, Jay," I suggested quietly, trying to regain some semblance of family decorum. "It truly is lovely." "Oh, darling." That was my cue to receive the definitive public slap. "Don't you dare speak!" Valentina shouted, her voice echoing violently off the towering glass walls of the atrium. This wasn't merely rudeness. This was a calculated attempt to strip me of my voice, my personhood, right there in the place I owned. She spun on me, her carefully structured face contorted with a frightening, raw fury. And then came the line, the defining, poisoned dagger that would irrevocably define the rest of their lives. She spat the words out to Jasmine, loud enough for every guest in the lobby to hear, clear enough to humiliate me completely. "She's just the help," Valentina sneered. Then she commanded the manager, "Don't talk to the old woman. She's just the cleaner. My son. My own son, Jay." Instead of defending the woman who had sacrificed decades of her life to raise him, burst out into a loud, dismissive laugh. He confirmed her cruel assessment, validating my complete humiliation. Jay let slip. The final, devastating, humiliating insult meant to remove me completely. She tends to get lost, you see. Take the old woman somewhere she won't embarrass us anymore and make sure someone keeps an eye on her. Strangers were watching. Some were recording the dramatic scene with their mobile phones. My heart, which had been wounded for years by their neglect, splintered into a million pieces right then. I wanted to scream, to weep, to run, to vanish from the face of the earth, but the steel that had built my empire held me firm. I met Jasmine's gaze across the polished counter. She knew the truth. She was the only one in the room, besides me, who knew I was the owner. She held silent, loyal anguish, waiting patiently for my signal to unleash hell. But I wasn't ready to act yet, not from shame, never from shame, but from a calculated, chilling, cold rage. I simply picked up my small, worn suitcase and walked toward the elevator banks. My back was ramrod straight, my eyes level, utterly determined not to give them the slightest satisfaction of seeing me break, of seeing me cry. For the rest of that day and into the evening, they treated me precisely as Valentina had instructed, like an unpaid domestic worker, a ghost, a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. I was reduced to an unpaid nanny and errand runner. Valentina commanded me to watch the children by the pool for 4 hours straight, dictating the precise sunscreen schedules and snack restrictions, treating me as if she couldn't possibly trust me to care for my own grandchildren. "This is our vacation, Mom," she said when I asked how long they planned to be at the exclusive spa. "It is not yours." But the true poison, the most enduring legacy of their cruelty, had already infected the children. My own grandchildren, indoctrinated by their mother's lies, came to me with genuine confusion. "Grandma," one asked, "Mom says you used to clean houses for rich people. Is that true?" The casual, unquestioning cruelty of the inquiry was truly breathtaking. "Mom says you make up stories about being important because you're ashamed of being poor," another repeated, parroting his mother's contempt. They thought I was a pathetic, delusional woman living in squalor and lying about my life's worth. All this while, I owned the very penthouse they were fighting over. That evening, the final, crucial evidence I needed was delivered, packaged perfectly in their utter, overwhelming arrogance. I quietly located myself near their cabana after dark and overheard them talking, their voices clear and utterly contemptuous, softened only slightly by the sound of the ocean waves. They discussed my life as a pitiful, inconvenient joke, a burden to be discarded once my utility ran out. "The only good thing about having her around," Jay chuckled, his voice devoid of any genuine filial affection, "is that she's a decent nanny. Free childcare, you know. She's so pathetically desperate for our approval, she'll do literally anything we ask, so we don't have to hire anyone." That was the absolute limit. The knife had been plunged in, twisted with cruelty, and then removed. This profound betrayal wasn't just about financial dependence or a simple lack of respect. It was about a complete systemic lack of humanity. They weren't merely taking my money and my time. They were taking my dignity, my past, and transforming my life's legacy into a cruel punchline. In that moment of chilling clarity, I realized that Jay was a willing, joyful accomplice in my degradation. They thought I was useless. They thought I was a joke. They thought my silence was weakness. I allowed a cold, hard, unwavering resolve to set in. It was the same resolve that propelled me through those 18-hour workdays decades ago. It was the absolute determination to survive and prevail, exactly the resolve required when facing threats to one's freedom and personhood. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jasmine's private number, the one I used only for urgent property matters. "Jasmine," I said, my voice steady, betraying no trace of the humiliation I had just endured. "It's fine. I need you to initiate Plan Delta. I need the documents now, and I need complete, immediate discretion. I need you to do something for me." I didn't waste a single moment waiting for the gentle civility of morning. I walked straight to the kids' club, where Valentina was retrieving the grandchildren, her face already showing irritation at having to perform the basic function of motherhood. "You need to call the front desk and book yourself a different room for the night," I announced, my voice cutting through the soft background noise. "You and Jay will be checking out immediately in the morning." They stared at me, dumbfounded, momentarily unable to process the statement. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Jay finally managed, the confusion etched across his entitled features. "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice gaining volume, fueled by the memory of the past 10 years of theft. "I overheard your little chat at the cabana. I know every contemptuous, horrible word you've been saying about me." Valentina's confusion immediately pivoted to raw, unfiltered fury. "You were eavesdropping on us. You have no right to spy on our private conversation," she hissed, trying desperately to turn the tables. I laughed then, darling. A deep, cold, deeply satisfied sound that came from the very center of my soul. "I own this hotel, Valentina," I said, making sure my voice carried, resonating with the full weight of my executive authority. "I have every right to do exactly what I want in my own property, and what I want is for you to leave immediately." I produced a simple, single document from my small purse, a meticulously prepared financial history showing every penny of financial support I had given Jay over the years. The mortgage down payment, the car loans, the Hawaiian vacations, the emergency cash transfers. His eyes widened instantly as he saw the astronomical, undeniable numbers. The total amount was an indictment, a lifetime of taking without gratitude. He finally realized the sheer magnitude of what he had taken for granted. "You've been lying to me about your money?" he asked his wife, his voice shaking with a terrible premonition of ruin. "She's the one lying. She's delusional," Valentina screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me in front of the now quickly gathering crowd of guests. "She doesn't own this place. She's just a useless old woman who cleans houses for a living. She's crazy." And that, sweetheart, was the most perfect, dramatic theatrical cue I could have ever asked for. Just then, Jasmine, the impeccable manager, entered the space, followed discreetly by 2 uniformed, authoritative security officers. She stood tall, calm, and utterly professional. "Jasmine, tell her!" Valentina shrieked, demanding immediate validation of her fraudulent narrative. I gave Jasmine a small, firm nod, a signal that the moment for silent anguish was finally over. The moment for absolute truth had arrived. "Mrs. Renee Carter is not only the owner of this specific hotel," Jasmine announced, looking straight at the rapidly crumbling Valentina. "She is the sole founder, CEO, and owner of all 17 of the Coastal Paradise properties across the United States. She is the reason we are all standing here today, and every employee on staff reports directly to her." Valentina's face went white, an absolute, total, sickening white. Every ounce of blood drained from her expression, leaving her looking like a mask of plaster. Jay simply stood there, frozen, utterly speechless, the document of my devastating generosity now feeling like a 50-pound indictment in his hand. "What is the meaning of this madness?" Valentina stammered out, her voice barely a thread. "It means," I said, my voice now perfectly modulated, filled with unyielding power and steely resolve, that you and your husband will be checking out immediately in the morning, and you will be paying your own way every single penny you have spent on this entitled trip. Every spa treatment, every expensive dinner, every single cocktail, it will all be billed directly and forcefully to your personal credit card. "You can't do this to us! We're your family!" she screamed, utterly hysterical. "Oh, but I can," I replied, that small, satisfied smile finally playing on my lips. "And I absolutely will." I turned my full attention to my son. "As for you, my dear son, Jay, you will no longer be receiving any further financial support from me. The mortgage payments stop, the grandchildren's school tuition stops, the supplemental health insurance stops. You're entirely and unequivocally on your own." Jay's face finally registered the totality of his loss, filled with a sickening, dawning realization of betrayal, not mine, but his own self-betrayal. They had thought they had me perfectly contained, right where they wanted me. They had no idea that the useless, pathetic old woman they mocked was the sovereign woman who held all the cards, every single one. Oh, darling, we must pause for a moment to truly comprehend the sheer, crushing, universal weight of this betrayal. Because this is not just a quick story of revenge. It is a systemic, calculated failure of basic human decency and filial structure. The entitlement displayed by Jay and Valentina is not unique. It is an archetype, repeated endlessly in stories of elder abuse and financial exploitation. They assumed my quiet nature was the definitive marker of my worth, modest, simple, and therefore easily disposable and exploitable. They believed the insidious narrative they themselves constructed, that I was merely the cleaner. This psychological calculation is identical to the cold calculus made by those who plan to institutionalize their mothers. They assume the older woman is too naive, too trusting, too easily confused to fight back, believing, as Jay and Valentina did, that we're all she has. They completely forget that a lifetime of experience, observation, and forced resilience creates an inner core of steel. In my situation, their arrogance was fatally cemented by my own strategic silence. But Jay, in his profound complicity, allowed this toxic narrative to spread, not just between us, but directly to the next generation. When my grandchildren parroted the lie that I was ashamed of being poor, that was the agonizing sound of my life's work and my inherent dignity being poisoned at the root. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty is intended to reinforce the abuser's superior social standing. They look at a mother's decades of hard work, her financial acumen, and reduce it all to a cheap, dismissive joke. And we must dissect the financial dimension, sweetheart, because that is the very soul of the betrayal. I was not just funding their luxury trips to Hawaii. I was underwriting a fundamentally unsustainable lifestyle. My profound, persistent generosity was misinterpreted not as love, but as pathetic desperation for their transactional approval. These adult children mistake the very nature of a mother's unconditional love for a perpetual, non-negotiable entitlement. My decision to halt the mortgage payments, to cancel the school tuition, and to bill them for every self-indulgent expense was not an act of petty spite. It was the absolutely necessary, surgically precise application of healthy, long, overdue boundaries. As every survivor who has reached clarity understands, it is time to give yourself the one thing they never gave you: respect. The gut-wrenching realization that you are viewed purely as an obstacle to our future, rather than as a treasured family member, is the coldest truth a mother can face. The meticulously orchestrated plan to commit fraud and humiliation is what distinguishes mere youthful selfishness from true, profound, predatory cruelty. They assumed I was utterly useless. They assumed I was delusional. They forgot that dignity, once brutally lost, can be powerfully, definitively reclaimed. My strategy, darling, once the pain clarified into purpose, was ruthlessly simple. I used their own overconfidence, and the very structure of the legal, financial world against them. When Jasmine, my steadfast hotel manager, confirmed that Mrs. Renee Carter was the sole CEO, founder, and owner of all 17 properties, that statement was not simply a public announcement of wealth. It was the instant, legal, and public obliteration of Valentina's entire premise of entitlement. Imagine the psychological devastation of that moment. Valentina, who had built her entire superficial identity on social performance and the visible markers of conspicuous consumption, was exposed to a crowd of wealthy tourists as an aggressive fraud and a liar. Her immediate, visible reaction turning ghostly white, stammering, clinging desperately to the final pathetic lie that I was merely the cleaner, was the devastating, irreversible physical manifestation of her perfect, fraudulent world collapsing entirely around her designer shoes. This immediate, public, and shocking reversal of fortune is often the only mechanism capable of penetrating the thick armor of a manipulator's arrogance. When the poor old lady reveals she is the majority shareholder, the CEO, the hidden multimillionaire, the power dynamic shatters permanently and violently. My subsequent action was precise. I canceled their financial life support immediately. The mortgage payments stopped. The free child care ended. The luxury credit card funding ceased. They thought they could perhaps dispute the charges for the spa and the dinner, but my preparation ensured I had protection notes on my account, official bank records, and legal documentation proving that I was the rightful cardholder and the charges were valid. Their scheme to defraud me was preemptively dismantled by 2 simple calls made hours before. The same cold, hard, definitive calculation was required here as it is in every battle for self-respect. My response to Jay and Valentina was utterly definitive. You made your choice. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it. There is absolutely no room for misplaced sentimentality when you are faced with such profound, calculated betrayal. Darling, I know the question that lingers in the minds of many viewers, particularly those who have yet to face this level of necessary reckoning. How could you do that to your own son? But this is the critical distinction I want to emphasize, the core truth learned after 68 years. I wasn't destroying my son's life. He utterly ruined his own life. I was merely refusing to continue serving as the primary accomplice to his destruction. Jay's silence in that beautiful, polished lobby, his subsequent laughter at my public humiliation, spoke volumes. He chose not to inconvenience his entitled wife over protecting his own mother's dignity. He allowed the abuse and the degradation to occur. This is why a mother must look at the adult child who has become an abuser and finally realize, you are my biological son, but you stopped treating me like your mother a very long time ago. You willingly turned me into your enemy, your perpetual maid, the convenient target of all your financial frustration. For over a decade, I endured the steady stream of disrespect from Jay and Valentina. I watched him systematically become weak, dependent, and financially reckless. I realized that continued, unquestioned funding was not helping him achieve competence. It was enabling him to remain an entitled, perpetual child, perpetually shielded from the bracing, unforgiving reality of adult responsibility. By cutting that financial cord, surgically and dramatically, I was forcing him to learn what I had learned through sheer necessity and brutal hardship. That one must rely only on oneself, and that true, enduring value lies in honesty above all else. When my manager, Jasmine, announced my true, glorious ownership, the shock was total. That beautiful, polished marble lobby, the sanctuary I had built through years of personal scrubbing and financial sacrifice, became the definitive stage for absolute justice. Jay and Valentina realized they had lost not just a free luxury vacation, but the permanent, unlimited ATM they had entirely structured their lives around. They looked at me with a sickening mix of shock, fear, and a belated sense of betrayal. But I looked back, seeing only the profound, unshakable clarity I had finally gained in that moment of irreversible decision. I taught them that respect isn't conditional upon your current bank account balance, but it is absolutely necessary for any access to my life. They thought I was a pathetic, useless inconvenience, but I showed them that the only thing truly useless was their boundless, ugly greed. Darling, let me elaborate on the universal nature of this entitlement, because my story is merely one manifestation of a pattern I see repeated thousands of times in the letters I receive. Jay and Valentina fit perfectly into the archetype of the predatory heir, often working in tandem with the cruel in-law. The cruel in-law, like Valentina, frequently uses public shame and social humiliation as a weapon. They weaponize social media or public settings to reinforce the mother's status as the cleaner or the useless old woman. This is done because they need social validation for their entitlement. They need others to believe the victim deserves the neglect, thereby justifying the eventual theft. The predatory heir, like Jay, is equally culpable, perhaps more so, because their crime is compounded by the abandonment of filial duty. He chose not to fight for his mother because he lacked the courage to confront the true power structure in his own home, his controlling wife. He was complicit in the plan to reduce me to an unpaid nanny. The most agonizing part of this is the realization that they were only waiting for my death or my incompetence to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. They rely on the profound trust inherent in the maternal bond. They use kindness as a shield for their fraud. They assume that because I once loved them unconditionally, that love guarantees my eternal silence. But true love, as I finally learned, requires boundaries and consequences. They mistook my financial discipline, my modest car, my quiet lifestyle for financial struggle. They were too self-absorbed to understand that true power often drives an old, paid-off Civic. True power observes in silence, meticulously documenting every cruelty. And when they threatened me, they believed the humiliation would force me into total submission. But threats, darling, are only effective when the victim is isolated and without evidence. They forgot that a woman who has built an empire from the ashes of widowhood knows precisely how to prepare for war. I was not alone. I had Jasmine, my loyal manager, and the entire legal and financial history of my own making. In the quiet aftermath, after they scrambled to gather their possessions, their arrogance replaced by dawning panic, the hotel settled back into its luxurious tranquility. The episode became local legend among the staff the moment the quiet CEO finally showed her formidable teeth. For Jay and Valentina, the fabricated world they lived in had finally collapsed. They had lost everything, not because of external misfortune, but because of their own internal moral rot. They learned the brutal lesson that when you reduce someone to nothing, a financial resource, a joke, an employee, they just might turn out to be the CEO who signs your eviction notice and cancels your entire future. It took me 68 years, sweetheart, to learn this final, undeniable truth. A woman is not defined by what others demand from her, but by what she consciously chooses for herself. When they mistook my kindness for profound weakness, I had to teach them the stark, unforgiving difference. I am Eleanor Baines. I am Renee Carter. I am every woman who has finally decided that it is never, ever too late to recover your dignity. My new life is richer, more authentic, and filled with a peace that no amount of their money or forced approval could ever buy. Now, tell me in the comments below, what is the most arrogant assumption someone has made about you because of your kindness? Drop it below and let's discuss. Like this video if it touched something in you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about what it means to be human, to be family, and to choose love even when it's complicated. I'll see you next time.